Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Poor Man's Bonsai. Today I'm taking this cute little elephant bush that I've had in this pot for several years. We're talking like probably 5 or 6 years, I would say. Never trimmed this thing. And I love that it's somehow stayed kind of stunted. This is the most it's grown in all of these years. Same pot, never repotted, and today I'm finally going to repot it and finally going to trim it and start to shape this thing, because I think it's got a lot of potential. I'll show you some close-ups. You'll see that the bark is starting to get real craggly, showing a lot of mature features, and I think it's just time to start to trim this thing down and see if we can get it to look like a tiny little tree. So such a cute little guy, and yeah, let's jump in. I'm going to be putting it in this pot. I got this pot from a bonsai nursery a couple years ago. It's like an authentic made in Japan bonsai pot. You know, I've always been fascinated with small bonsai like Mame and Shohin size and other sizes like that. So I love when I can do that. The problem is where I live is just so hot. I always struggle to keep really tiny bonsai alive, because I think in big part because the soil just dries up so quickly. But anyway, these succulents tend to be really hardy. So I'm going to put it in this tiny pot here, and I'm excited to see it being a pot that shows off more of the trunk. As you can see in this pot, the rim, it's kind of sunken down over time. The rim's covering up a lot of the plant. So I think putting in this pot will really allow it to shine like the beautiful plant that it is. So let's break open this guy. We won't break open the pot. I want to reuse this pot, definitely poor man style. And let's see what we're working with. Check out the root system, and I think what I'm going to do is actually pull it out and pot it before I cut it, because right now, because of just how far it's fallen into the pot or kind of lowered over time, it's hard for me to see the potential of the full plant. So I'm going to take it out and repot it and then trim it. So let's dive in and do that. Boom. Okay, I'm going to first start by preparing the pot. So because it's such a small pot and I want this thing to retain as much moisture as possible every time I water, I'm actually not going to add any kind of like crushed rock to this. And I actually bought a few months back at a nursery. I bought this type of potting soil. It's called it's by EB Stone Organics, called Bonsai soil. And you know, it says that it doesn't need to be mixed with anything, and that's fine. I think for this it'll work out great. So I'm not even going to plug the hole of this thing, because it's already so small that between the stick that's underneath there with the wire and how small the hole is already, I don't think I'm going to need to worry about any dirt falling through or much dirt falling through. You can see just by doing that, hardly any comes out. So I think this thing will be okay. And I'm just going to kind of set the stage for this. It's a very shallow pot, and I'm looking inside. This soil actually has some a bit of crushed rock in it anyway, so I think leaving it as is will be good. And next we're going to start working on the plant. So set that aside. Let's bring in the plant. Alright, so as I stated in the intro, I've never trimmed this thing, and all the other elephant bush that I have, if I let them go even for a couple months, they're growing like wild. So the fact that this thing has been in this pot for so many years, never trimmed it, and that it stayed so stunted, I'm really surprised, and I've always been excited to repot this thing. I've been waiting a long time for this video or for this project. So if you know why potentially this thing has grown so little over the last several years, I'd love for you to let me know in the comments. I guess it could be a variety of reasons, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But the first thing I'm going to do is just take it out of the pot, and we'll evaluate the roots. So clearly I had set some gravel in this. I'm not sure why, but let's get that out. Set that aside. And let's just pull it out. So, okay, roots pretty decent. Yeah, pretty decent set of roots. Honestly though, for how long it's been in that pot, I would even venture to say it hardly looked root bound, but maybe a little bit, but not as much as I would have thought. But now that I've kind of exposed the trunk, I could see down at the base I've got a couple long branches. This one right here is starting all the way at the base, and then this one right here is as well. So those two are probably sapping, and ironically or unironically, I don't know, maybe it makes sense. This is the tallest branch of the whole thing. So I'm going to take these two bottom branches off because clearly they're probably eating up a lot of the energy that this plant is trying to use to push out new growth. So I already know some basic cuts I'm going to do with this thing. So, all right. So I'm actually going to do those two cuts before I even pot it because I could already tell that I already know that I don't want those in there. So let's get our little snippers here and let's remove those two branches. So 1, 2. So you can see it immediately opened up the trunk and gives us a lot more of a visual of what we're going for. So next step is we're going to get it in the pot. Okay, so I've got it just sitting on the new pot, and now I'm going to decide the angle I want this thing at. This thing is so small that I feel like any position I set it in will give me a good starting spot. So actually, you know what? Let me first determine the front, which I love the house and the little pond and the plants on the front of this pot. The backside has some mountains, which is really cool too. But I'm going to use the house as the front. And I think for now, you know, when I repot, I can always change it. But for now, I'm going to utilize the trunk here that I exposed by cutting those two low branches. I'm going to use that as the front. So let's go ahead and get some roots trimmed, and we'll wire this thing up with this as the front. Take my trimmer, and not going to do too much. Okay, I think I like this position. Go ahead and twist the wires in place. Get my little pliers here. Give it a couple more twists. The weather has been so odd today. I mean, where I live it gets super hot in the summer, but today it's been really overcast, and I can actually hear some rain on the tin roof of our shed here. Very relaxing. Okay, so we got it in position in the pot here. I'm going to take my clippers and trim the excess. Okay, so now we got it wired in place. What I'm going to do next is just fill in the rest of the soil and kind of get the tree going. Alright, I pulled this little dead stick off one of my other plants. I'm just going to use this, kind of work the soil around in there. This is definitely one that when I water it, I have to be super careful. One wrong water, I'm sure, could send all of the soil in this thing out of the pot, onto the ground, and out of the life of this poor plant. So I'm just going to give it a quick water, and then we'll get a little closer and we'll trim it up. Alright, so we're all watered up. I ended up taking a little bit of crushed lava rock off the top of a different plant and just setting it on top. I figured the heaviness of it would at least help keep some of the soil intact until the roots really set on this thing. So yeah, I am really enjoying this already. So I wanted to get nice and close. So you'll see there are a few branches that are out of the frame, but that's okay. I think this is only going to require a few cuts, at least for starters. So as I look at the trunk, what I notice is real fat at the bottom, which is awesome, and it kind of comes up here, and then there's there's a potential apex right here, so that kind of comes up and swerves almost like, not really an S shape, but it's just like a kind of comes up and goes right here. And then you have a couple of these branches that are growing higher up, but I don't think these are gonna make, at least for what I'm thinking, I don't think these will make great apexes. So right off the bat, what I'm gonna do is trim these 2 branches that are out of the frame and just develop a new high point in the plant. Something really cool about this particular one that I have is that all the leaves are super fat, so full of moisture. And I thought of something when I was watering the plant. I realized, well, I don't know if this is a silly thought or what, but I'm going to experiment by taking all of these clippings and putting them in the same pot, and probably even labeling it clippings from the stumpy little guy, and we'll see if maybe this particular plant is the reason why it doesn't grow very much. Because I would love to be able to make more of these with some of its cuttings. So just in case it has to do with this specific plant, I'm going to put its clippings in a very specific pot, so I know that they came from this plant. So anyway, that's a little side note. So within 2 cuts now, we have, in my opinion, a pretty exposed trunk. And I think only a few more cuts are needed. I think for the look, this branch, unnecessary. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this one off, or at least pretty far back. Okay, so now we have an even clearer look going on. So right now, this is my thought for the apex. And I think in looking at it from the front, after those 3 cuts, it now feels like this branch is not very necessary to the whole look anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this whole thing off. Now we have the trunk comes up, we have a branch here, and it gets a little hard to see what's going on in this point. So if I flip it to this angle, there's a branch growing in the middle right here that I think I'm going to take out because I think it is not helping. I think it's a little too cluttered up here, so I'm going to take that out. So now there's a lot more space for us to see what we're working with. And so now, this is something I learn as I go. Like, I feel like when I'm trimming, oftentimes I'll reduce branches back, and then as you're going and you start trimming other branches, you'll start to notice branches that become kind of unnecessary altogether. So that's sort of how I'm feeling now about this one, because it looks like the flow of the trunk is sort of coming up and going this direction. And so because we have this part up here going that direction already, I feel like this branch sort of is a bit redundant. So I think I'm going to take this one out. So yeah, see, I really like that now. So now we're getting to where we have a defined trunk, a few defined, clusters of foliage, and it really helps us to see the craggliness of the trunk, which I think is one of its best features. Even from this side, I think it looks really cool. And so now that I've defined this as the apex, I'm going to trim this one back just a little bit more to that first set of leaves. And it looks a little bare right now, but I think as it grows, it's going to look pretty cool. And this might take a long time. If it's anything compared to how slow it grew in the other pot, it might be a long time before this starts sprouting new foliage. But my hope is that being in a new pot with new soil, new nutrients, maybe it could take off a little bit. But I believe as of right now, that's all I'm gonna do. So one of the things I realized is when I was using these things, some of the branches were so thick on this that it was a little hard to cut. So I'm actually gonna go through and clean up some of these with a little bit bigger clippers. And then we'll get some close-ups on this thing. But I believe I'm set with this right now, and I'm enjoying the starting place of this plant. So let's trim it up a little bit more, clean up these edges, and then we'll get some more close-ups. All right, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, so I took some new really sharp pruners that we have. They're bigger, but I was almost able to just take the sharp blade part of it and just kind of slice and clean all these parts up. And it looks so much better. It gives a lot more kind of clarity to where I'm wanting this thing to go, because some of the parts I trimmed off there, the stumps were sticking out kind of far. So now, you know, you can see the flesh, the fleshy parts, but hopefully as it heals up, those will cover nicely. But so you can see, I think this has got a lot of potential. Right now I have 3 or 4 kind of main pads going on. Obviously the trunk comes up. Got this one here with 2 little, really fat little leaves on it. And then moving up, we got this part here, a couple fat leaves. And then I really like this middle section here where the trunk sort of takes a turn. If you're looking at it from the house side of things, house sort of makes a left, and we have this point here, and then our final kind of apex here. So this is what I've got so far, and I love how it looks. I think this thing is finally getting the spotlight that it deserves. Being in that pot, and just that pot it was just sitting for so long. I would just water it and just observe it from time to time and just sort of dream about what this thing will look like when I finally get it in a new pot. But I think this thing has got some great potential, and really excited to see how it turns out. And it's so cute, just fits in the palm of my hand. And I think my favorite feature so far is just how mature the trunk already looks. So that, I think, immediately gives, especially once these heal and that some of those scars heal up, I think this thing will immediately have the look of an old plant. So there's that fun little elephant bush project with a tiny little stunted one that I've been wanting to do something with for a long time. Hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching.